You probably remember reading The Catcher in the Rye back in high school, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
You probably remember Holden Caulfield, the red hunting hat, the teenage angst, and all those complaints about everybody being a phony.
It's basically a cultural rite of passage at this point.
It really is.
Yeah.
But what if I told you that everything you think you know about J.D. Salinger and his most famous character is barely scratching the surface?
We're going way deeper today.
Exactly. Today we are bringing you into a really fascinating, highly analytical chat log that completely dissects the mind, the trauma, and the sheer literary genius of Salinger.
Yeah, we've got a stack of deep conversational excerpts exploring some intense literary criticism, Salinger's actual military history, and the profound, often tragic psychology behind his characters.
And our mission for this deep dive is to move way past that standard high school English class reading. We really want to uncover for you how an extreme historical context and severe psychological trauma forged Salinger's completely unique voice.
Right. And we're also going to explore why his famous 50-year withdrawal from society wasn't just him being some grumpy recluse.
No, not at all.
It was actually a profound act of devotion.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with that unmistakable Salinger voice. You know it when you read it.
You really do.
It's the italics, the M dashes, the hyper-specific brand names. And it turns out it's actually incredibly easy to mimic those surface quirks.
Very easy.
But when early artificial intelligence, like the first large language models, tried to generate text in Salinger's voice, they failed completely.
Completely missed the mark.
And human imitators hit the exact same wall. They just couldn't capture the magic. And the reason why is absolutely brilliant. It's because the style itself is the psychology.
That internal architecture is crucial to understanding why Salinger's work endures. The voice isn't just a container for the character's thoughts, it is the character's psychological survival mechanism. When you look at how a Salinger narrator operates, whether it's Holden Caulfield or a member of the Glass family, there are really 4 layers working simultaneously. First, underneath everything, the narrator is deeply sincere. They actually feel things intensely and mean what they say.
But they rarely sound sincere on the surface, right? I mean, Holden is constantly complaining, calling everyone a phony, sounding completely exhausted by the world.
And that brings us to the second layer. They are performing cynicism, but it's purely a defense mechanism.
Ah, okay.
They use that sarcastic, world-weary tone to protect their own fragile sincerity from a world that just doesn't care about it.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and the third layer is that on some level they are aware that they are performing. They know they're putting on a show. But the fourth layer, and this is where the tragedy really lives, is that they are not fully aware of the extent of it. The mask has essentially fused to the face.
Wow. So when an AI or an imitator tries to copy that without understanding the internal mechanics, they either write a character who is genuinely, bitterly cynical.
Which entirely misses the wounded vulnerability underneath.
Exactly. Or they write someone so transparently vulnerable that the protective irony completely dissolves.
It's a remarkably delicate balance to strike.
Yeah.
You simultaneously believe Holden, but you also see right through him. It requires constructing a very specific kind of self-deception rather than just throwing on a quirky tone of voice.
Yeah.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at where that massive anxiety and need for defense actually comes from.
Because it's definitely not just standard teenage angst.
Not at all. The historical context here is everything. Holden isn't just a sensitive kid with a defense mechanism.
Yeah.
He's a sensitive kid existing in a very specific, terrifying historical moment.
Post-World War II.
Exactly. The adults around him had just participated in World War II. They had literally unleashed the atom bomb. There's a brilliant phrase from our analysis that refers to this as cosmic violence.
Cosmic violence. That's a heavy phrase.
It is. And after witnessing and participating in that level of absolute destruction, society essentially asked everyone to just go back to normal, to buy things, to get a good job, to smile at cocktail parties.
I want you to really imagine that for a second. Put yourself in that position. You are standing in a newly nuclear world. You know something fundamentally world-shattering has just happened, something that threatens to remake the entire globe in its image.
And the adults around you are just acting like everything is perfectly fine.
Yeah, they're handing you a blazer and telling you to fit in and go to prep school.
And that dissociation is what Holden actually means when he talks about phoniness. It isn't just about people being superficial snobs. It is a civilization-scale dissociation.
They had to block it out.
Basically, an entire generation of adults had to mentally check out and pretend the world was fine just so they could function after what they had witnessed. Holden, who didn't fight in the war and doesn't have that psychological permission structure to kind of compartmentalize his feelings, just sees this massive dissociation completely nakedly.
But he's just a kid. He has no language for why it disturbs him so much. He just knows everyone is faking it.
That anxiety is load-bearing. It's coming from a very real existential place.
Which perfectly sets up a moment in Salinger's writing that absolutely floored me. We're stepping away from Holden for a second to look at one of Salinger's least read stories called The Last Day of the Last Furlough.
Oh, this is such a powerful piece.
There's a character in it named Babe, and he delivers this quietly devastating speech to his father and his friend Vincent.
It's an extraordinary passage. Babe essentially argues that the entire apparatus of meaning-making around war, the narratives of heroism, the Hollywood movies, the patriotic sacrifices, the lessons we supposedly learned, is the exact machinery that produces the next war.
Yeah.
He says, it's time we let the dead die in vain.
It's time we let the dead die in vain. That is such a heavy, radical thought to put down on paper.
He argues that if German boys had learned to have contempt for war, to point at pictures of soldiers in history books and just laugh at them, then Hitler would have had to take up knitting to keep his ego warm.
Knitting to keep his ego warm.
Babe is making the case that finding meaning and glory in the violence is the true danger.
And the true brilliance of Salinger is how he frames that moment. Right after Babe delivers this profound, earth-shattering speech, Salinger completely buries it.
He really does.
Babe immediately feels like he made a fool of himself. The men at the table, his father and Vincent, say absolutely nothing in response. The silence is deafening. And then the scene completely pivots.
Right to the little girl.
Yes. It shifts to a little girl named Maddie, who is under the table, wriggling around and tying the laces of her shoes together. We were just talking about civilization-scale dissociation, and here Salinger shows it in real time.
It's the ultimate sucker punch of normalcy.
It just highlights life's complete indifference to profound truths. The most serious thing anyone could possibly say about human survival is instantly swallowed by domestic silence and a kid tying her shoelaces.
Salinger wrote that scene, articulating exactly why veterans shouldn't write about the war or romanticize it. And then he went and lived it.
Let's slow down here and talk about his actual war record, because it is staggering. The guy who wrote the ultimate novel about adolescent alienation didn't just sit in a cafe theorizing. He went to Normandy.
He landed at Utah Beach on D-Day.
And he actually had early chapters of The Catcher in the Rye in his field pack while he was doing it. Imagine storming a beach under heavy fire with the beginnings of an American masterpiece in your backpack.
He fought through 5 separate campaigns. And perhaps most significantly, he helped liberate a subcamp of Dachau. He saw the absolute darkest depths of human capability firsthand.
He later told Ernest Hemingway, "You never really get the smell out." And speaking of Hemingway, there is a documented meeting between the two of them in liberated Paris. Hemingway actually read Salinger's writing and complimented it, which is saying something given Hemingway's massive ego.
Definitely.
But there's also this unverified, highly believable piece of lore about that meeting that we have to talk about. Allegedly, Hemingway shot a chicken with a handgun right in front of Salinger.
It's such a wild image.
No, it's important to clarify that this is an unverified anecdote from the biographical legend, but just think about the contrast if it's true. You have Hemingway, who constantly romanticized war and demonstrated this highly performative relationship with violence.
And sitting across from him is Salinger, who has just witnessed the true, unromanticized horrors of the concentration camps, sitting there processing real, unfathomable trauma. It perfectly encapsulates their opposing worldviews.
No.
Hemingway's putting on a show, and Salinger's looking right through it. And Salinger's trauma was compounded by his specific military role. He wasn't just infantry. He was attached to the Counterintelligence Corps or the CIC.
Yeah.
What's fascinating here is his primary job. He was tasked with detecting enemy agents and conducting denazification interrogations after the surrender.
Wait, so his literal day job was to catch people in a lie?
Exactly. Think about what that entails. He was sitting across a table from people who had committed atrocities, but who were now performing normalcy. They were performing contrition. His entire job was to find the seam between their performance and reality. He was professionally trained and credentialed in detecting phoniness.
So he interrogates people for a living, trying to figure out what they are hiding to save their own skins. And then he comes home to America and writes characters who cannot turn that radar off.
This training is exactly what developed Salinger's unmatched ear for dialogue.
Yeah.
Interrogation teaches you to hear conversations on 2 tracks simultaneously.
2 tracks.
Yes. what people say and what they actually mean. You have to track both without revealing that you're tracking both. Salinger's characters are almost always talking around the real issue.
Like Holden.
Right. Holden talks around his profound grief for his dead brother, Ali. The dialogue has these tiny gaps, a slight over-explanation, a detail that's a little too precise, a sudden change of subject. That's the sound of someone concealing their true emotional state. Salinger learned in those interrogation rooms that everyone has a cover story. The question is just what they are protecting.
So, what does this all mean for you? Well, think about how you process a conversation in your own life. When most of us hear subtext or we pick up on the fact that someone is hiding something, we learn to triage that intelligence.
They have to.
Right. We file it away so we can just function and get through the day. If someone is acting a little off at lunch, you might notice it, but you let it go so you can finish your meal and get back to work. Salinger couldn't file it away.
He heard every single dissonance, every gap between truth and performance indefinitely.
That is an agonizing way to live. Everything is signal, nothing is noise.
It's the curse of intelligence without the ability to filter. Holden's entire problem is that he can't file anything away. His dead brother's baseball mitt stays perpetually open on his desk. The trauma remains entirely active. And this brings us to how Salinger viewed the people who can file things away, the people who can just exist in the world without being crushed by the subtext.
Yes. Let's talk about Elaine Coutell from Franny and Zooey. We've all known Elaine Coutell. The analysis we're looking at has these incredible descriptions of him. He is referred to as the your NPC.
The original non-playable character.
Basically, yeah. The guy who just fills out the background of the world in literature. They describe him as a 6-foot block of wood, and my absolute favorite phrase, load-bearing, but not quite alive. We've all been on a date with a 6-foot block of wood, right?
Lane is such a vital character to examine because he represents the structural lumber of society. He is necessary to hold the roof up, he is present, he follows the rules, but you'd never think to ask how he's actually doing on a soul level. During the famous restaurant scene, Lane isn't being malicious. He's just a 20-year-old guy who prepared for a nice weekend. He made a reservation, he ordered frog legs, and he really wants to talk about this dense paper he wrote on the French author Flaubert. He's trying to impress his girlfriend.
But sitting across from him is Franny, who is in the middle of a quiet cosmological emergency. She's having a complete spiritual breakdown right there at the table.
And he has absolutely no map for what is happening to her. He keeps trying to salvage the date through logistics. He's focusing on the food, the wine, the schedule. But his recovery plan is designed for a version of Franny that doesn't exist anymore.
This raises an important question about how we relate to each other. The profound takeaway here is that Lane is optimizing for the wrong problem with complete sincerity.
Yes, he means well. He's trying his best. But he is completely missing the reality of what Franny is experiencing.
I want you to really think about that dynamic. Think about your own life, your past relationships, your friendships. How often do well-intentioned relationships completely fall apart because one person builds an entire architecture of effort? They try so hard, they do all the right things, but it's entirely based on a misdiagnosis of what the other person actually needs.
It happens all the time.
You can be completely sincere, but sincerity doesn't fix a targeting problem. Two people can sit at the same table, both completely alone, because one is having an existential crisis and the other is just stressing over his frog legs. Salinger captures that everyday tragedy perfectly.
He does, and there is a complicated sympathy there. Salinger perhaps recognized a bit of himself in that block of wood, or at least recognized the necessity of the Elaine Coutells of the world. But he also wrote characters that represented the paths he couldn't take, or the versions of himself he couldn't save.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We've talked about how Salinger saw the people who could file trauma away. But how did he view himself? Where is Salinger in his own books? Let's talk about the alter egos. First, there's Stradlater from Catcher in the Rye. Stradlater is Holden's roommate. He's handsome, he's socially fluent, he moves through rooms effortlessly, and he doesn't notice what he's not noticing. He just glides through life.
Right.
Our dive into this material suggests that Stradlater is the guy Salinger could have been. Salinger was handsome and charming before the war. He was a New York kid with a lot of promise, but the war burned that ease right out of him. You can't unsee the liberation of a concentration camp and still be Stradlater.
Yeah, you really can't.
So Holden hates Stradlater from the inside out with the specific fury of someone who understands that effortless existence but lost access to it forever.
Then you have the Glass brothers, Seymour and Buddy, who represent the two halves of Salinger's post-war psyche. Seymour is the version of Salinger who couldn't filter the noise. He heard the 2 tracks of dialogue so loudly, saw the phoniness so clearly that he ultimately couldn't survive it and took his own life.
And
Buddy, on the other hand, is the alter ego who survives. But Buddy's whole existence becomes about meticulously tending to Seymour's flame. He is constantly returning to the same unfiled trauma, pulling out the same folders, writing about Seymour endlessly. Buddy is the functional survivor, but he's trapped by his inability to move on.
which mirrors Salinger's own life in a profound way. He created an elaborate escape hatch for himself. He retreated to a physical monastery of his own making in Cornish, New Hampshire for 50 years. And this is the biggest misconception about Salinger. He didn't stop writing.
He just stopped publishing.
He had 50 years of unpublished manuscripts accumulating in a vault.
That completely reframes how we should view his later life and his notoriously aggressive lawsuits against unauthorized publications. People often viewed those lawsuits as the actions of a jealous recluse trying to protect a commercial brand.
Yeah, that was the popular narrative.
But there is a moment in the stories where Seymour tells Buddy that his occupation isn't writer, his religion is. When we apply that to Salinger, the writing wasn't a product. It was a sacred devotional practice.
So when he sued people or blocked publication, it wasn't about money or brand management. It was about protecting a sacred artifact from desecration. He was keeping his private correspondence with something he believed in completely safe from the machinery of commerce, public judgment, and phoniness. He was doing the work entirely free from the ego of needing an audience.
The withdrawal from publishing was less about not caring what people thought, and more about only wanting the work to exist on terms consistent with what it meant to his soul. The unpublished manuscripts aren't a hidden treasure vault waiting to be monetized. They are the evidence that he finally found a way to separate the act of creation from the need to be witnessed.
Okay, we've covered incredible ground today. We started with the realization that you can't fake the Salinger voice because it's born from the trauma of the nuclear age and the horrors of World War II.
Yes.
We looked at how his time as a military interrogator permanently cursed him to hear the 2 tracks of every conversation, leading to the heartbreak of sincere misdiagnosis like poor Lane Coutell and his frog legs in that Connecticut restaurant.
Right.
And finally, we uncovered how his alter egos, from Stradlater to Buddy Glass, mirror a man who eventually chose 50 years of silence, not as a surrender, but as his ultimate devotional masterpiece.
Which leaves us with a final thought to consider. If Salinger's time interrogating captured soldiers taught him that any public performance is inherently a lie, a mask we wear just to survive, then perhaps his 50 years of hidden manuscripts aren't a buried treasure waiting for us to read them.
What do you mean?
Perhaps the fact that they remained entirely unread is the message. In a modern world where we are constantly pressured to publish our every thought, to perform our trauma for engagement, and to optimize our sincerity for an audience, what if the most radical, enlightened thing a person can do is create something deeply beautiful and never, ever show it to anyone?
Wow. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. As you go about your day, pay attention to the conversations around you and keep questioning those 2 tracks of dialogue you might be hearing. Until next time.